Välkomna. Welcome everybody. I'm so happy that we have this collaboration with the music festival, Stockholm Music Arts. Last year we had Patti Smith here, and I can't really think of a better way to continue this collaboration between the music part of things and the conversations, and then having Dan Graham and Lydia Lunch here. I'm really happy you made it all the way.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Lydia Lunch, I think most of you who are here know, an important writer and musician, singer. Dan Graham, very important artist. We have a piece up here next to the entrance. And we're celebrating an anniversary. It's 30 years ago that Dan produced an incredibly important art piece called Rock My Religion. It's being shown in the little cinema here all weekend. That same year, I think, or I might be wrong, but almost that year, I guess, there was this show here called Vanishing Point.
Flyfunkter.
Pardon?
The Swedish is Flyfunkter.
Exactly.
Whatever
exactly.
that means.
Yeah,
Flyfunkter.
Flyfunkter. And that was an important show. We often think about this museum, and when people want to mention historically important works, it's often the case that we talk about the fact that maybe some pop artists in the early 60s were here. But I think if one wants to think about very, very significant moments in the history of this museum, that exhibition and the fact that Dan was here and that then Rock My Religion was produced with some support from this museum, I'm always very happy to notice.
His name was Ulrich Ernaf.
Yes.
I think he was chief curator.
Yeah.
And he was a very, very relaxed, non-uptight guy.
No.
At that point in his career.
Well, Ulle was the curator of that exhibition, and he was the director of the museum.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows, maybe he shows up later, we will see. At least he's aware of this, that we're celebrating the 30th anniversary. We have Elena Tzotzi here, who's been working with Dan, I know. There's an exhibition at Signal in Malmö. She's one of the people who run this museum and will ask questions and moderate this conversation. Catrin, thank you for arranging this. I don't know if there's anything else I should say, and I don't want to bore you, so I leave the word now to you, Helena.
Thank you. So I thought that I would start by just saying that it's a great honor to be in the company of two people that have inspired and continue to inspire through their work, their lives, their visions, ideals, and struggles. We have Dan, whose writings, films, videos, performances, architecture aspirations, and love for music have been a source of inspiration. And we have Lydia Lunch, whose music, writing, spoken word manifest a strong, stubborn, and compromising position that encourages the act of following your own path and not apologizing for it. And with this in mind, I was thinking that since today's discussion is about the 30th anniversary of Rock My Religion, another recent piece by Dan Graham came to my mind, a puppet opera entitled Don't Trust Anyone Over 30. So instead of actually doing this as a kind of a ceremony for the 30th anniversary of Rock My Religion, and instead of treating it as a kind of a historic relic, why don't we use it as a kind of a companion in our thinking and dialogue today? Let's maybe just start from the beginning. And I was thinking that something that is really a shared love for you both is actually the interest and love for music, and how that maybe early on led you to then continue and choose the path that you have chosen.
I'm going to butt in and say really a love of literature also is what we share, and literature is what inspired me to make music. At 12, 13, it was Hubert Selby, it was Henry Miller, it was Genet, it was the Marquis de Sade, it was Jung that inspired me and put me on the path that I knew I had to create something. And I had to create something that was, that there existed a void in literature, I felt, that needed to be filled by a feminine voice dealing with universal trauma. So I was inspired to start writing at 12, and I only turned to music because when I landed in New York at 16 to finally live there, spoken word didn't exist yet. So it was post-beat, post-Patti Smith poetry and rock, which I didn't want to do, and spoken word didn't really exist. So I created a music, Teenage Jesus, which was brutally percussive, only to back up what the words were screaming out. And even though a lot of the music was instrumental, it was still a scream of the anger that I felt. So I turned to music as a weapon, as a tool to back up the words, which literature had inspired me and chose me, that I had to start finding a truth, finding a way to connect the universal trauma of life and how to verbalize that for those that do not have a voice.
And for you, Dan, that kind of search for that voice or the tool that you wanted to work with, how was that?
Well, first of all, I was more psychotic than Lydia.
I was you were more psychotic?
Yes, more psychotic.
I'm a sociopath. I'm very calm.
Oh yes, but I read when I was a teenager. They published when I was 14. I read Sartre's Nausea because I thought high school was nausea. Some things from Being in Nothingness, and a lot of French new novels. But I basically was a slacker, and I had two friends who wanted to start a gallery to social climb. I didn't know anything about art, but I read Esquire magazine, which had some very good writing. So I started a gallery, and anybody who arrived before Christmas, I put into a Christmas show, and I bonded with a lot of artists, like Saul LeWitt, Dan Flavin, Judd, and Smithson, all who wanted to be writers as well as artists. So I became an artist-writer. And I got into rock and roll because Andy liked rock and roll. But my favorite was the Kinks because the work was very depressive, as I was. And I became a rock writer because I'd read Leslie Fiedler, American critic, and I found all the great writers about rock and about literature were rock and roll writers. Sandy Pearlman, Lenny Kaye, Richard Meltzer. So in a way, after doing a lot of rock writing, some of it feminist, like my article New Wave Feminism, I realized that the thing to do was actually a film, because there were great films like Rude Boy about the Clash. In other words, rock documentary inspired me. So as a kind of an amateur thing, I did Rock My Religion with a cheap camera. Thurston Moore turned me on actually to Minor Threat and Black Flag, hardcore, and I actually pieced the whole thing together as a kind of essay with the heroine. I didn't really like Patti Smith that much, but Thurston loved Patti Smith, and he was my downstairs neighbor. So I ransacked his files and came up with her as the heroine of the Shakers. It was a kind of a strange feminist piece. I became a male feminist because at 13 I read Margaret Mead, looking at the pictures of naked women, Aborigine women. But I was always a kind of a male feminist until this terrible period of the 80s when you had politically correct feminists who were anti-sex and anti-pornography. I think that's slowly changing.
Well, when you say feminist to me, I always thought of myself as a humanist, feminist, or feminazi, which I've been accused of being, which is I prefer, because feminist to me is like saying mustard. It's like saying water. It's such a generic term. And, of course, there were censors masquerading as feminists who became very anti-sex and anti-pornography. To me, I felt those feminists just weren't watching the right pornography. I felt that there's a lot of terrible pornography the same way there's a lot of terrible music and terrible art. And if you were to walk into a porno video store when you didn't know anything and you chose 10 videos to watch, most of them would be crap, the same as if you walked into a music store to pick 10 records that you knew nothing about, it would be crap. But I think
or Amazon.com.
The feminists that you're talking about, I think it was another form of censorship. I think just because it made no sense to me at all. I was pro-pornography, pro-sex, pro-female energy, but I was pro-human because I think that men, although I batter them politically in my speech, I'm always attacking men in positions of power, which is not the average man. It's like the Uberman or the cockocracy, which has nothing to do with individuals, which I consider most men. So where this is leading, I don't know. Around then is when I decided to just term myself Cuntzilla versus the cockocracy.
Notice, I interrupt, but notice that Lydia has a sense of humor. And I think the great art is about humor. I hated conceptual art because it's fake philosophy. Well, I think all work, great art, comes out of humor with a little bit of parody.
My humor was often overlooked. I mean, I was always laughing from the get. I was laughing with all of my art, but usually frowning on the stage because of my intellectual sadism. Anyone that could laugh or got the dark humor, the deadly black humor of what I did, I thought could truly see what I was trying to get. But it's like a lot of great philosophers. I mean, some of my great... E.M. Ceron, for instance, I mean, you laugh or you cry, and I guess that's the basis of a lot of my art, is a lot of what makes me cry, I then need to create an art that's so brutal that it is going to slap you in the face, but at the end of it, it's also like a tickle somewhere that you need to be tickled, and hopefully it's, as art should be, a salve to the universal wound somehow. I mean, first, of course, you have to cauterize, you have to pour peroxide in the wound, you have to dig out the pus, and then maybe a gentle cotton Band-Aid. But now we're only talking about my spider bite, I don't know.
Well, we're at Moderna Museet. What do you think of Niki de Samtal? First, I didn't understand the work, but now I realize, in a way, her importance. Maybe that's because she died about 5 years ago.
But then also talking about something else that connects in your work, and both the idea of humor, but also the idea of actually being political without being didactic, which I think is a very strong part of your work. And then going back to the idea of humor, of not just being something that is a kind of a witty slapstick, but humor as a kind of a deeper way of maybe tackling and revolting.
I was forced to become political because I was born in an era where Ronald Reagan was the fucking president of America. So at that point in my early 20s, I mean, when I began doing spoken word, the first object of my attack was my father. And then it went to God the Father, then the father of our country, because it was the unholy trilogy, the, again, cockocracy, the patriarchy, which I felt needed to be addressed. So being born in an era of Reaganism, I mean, before that, No Wave was basically dealing with your personal insanity, as opposed to British punk rock music, which was a lot about social insanity. I'm from No Wave, which is more Dada, more about personal insanity, and but then there just came a point where you could not avoid the political. And Reagan, and I thought it was quite funny when my first full-blown solo show opened with these lines, although most of the public or the critics weren't laughing. When I opened The Gun is Loaded, which now a title like that would be considered treason, thank you, Bill Clinton, for making more laws like this, that came later, it's all about getting fucked. Fucked up, fucked around where they're just playing good old-fashioned fucked, and you guessed it, if you said the biggest dick of all, and I went on to talk about Ronald Reagan. Now to me, this is black humor. This is Lenny Bruce. This is pretty fucking funny. But because I'm using such strong language and daring to swear in the hallowed grounds of an art institution or the performing garage, it was a bit harsh for most people to take. I'm still a bit too harsh for most people to take. And I still won't give up talking about politics, because now we have in America the beige puppet, Barack Obama, that false prophet, who's far worse than who he took on after, which is the Bush dynasty. So I have to continue to be political, because otherwise I'm going to become postal, which in America means picking up a gun and shooting people, which, you know, we have a habit of doing that in America because we're all fucking psychotic.
I want to say my...
You laughed. You got it. That is good. Good.
My politics are actually, believe it or not, European socialism, which has been dead for years. Jacques Lang, a very interesting character, who is a cultural minister of the Mitterrand government, wanted me to do my children's pavilion, which had a small connection with Jeff Walls in the city of Blois. Blois, he was mayor of Blois, and the city was involved with things for children. They had the Houdini Museum. Charlie and Chocolate Factory, Charlie and Chocolate Factory stage sets from the film, and they thought Children's Pavilion would fit the year 2000 celebration. Also, Michael Jackson wanted to do a theme park, but Jacques Lang, although he was married, also is known as a pederast, so he turned down the Michael Jackson offer. No, I love European socialism. I think America, the closest America came to socialism and dictatorship was FDR. But the thing I think humor is anarchistic humor is important. My hero, and I wrote about this in my article about punk rock, I think the Ramones really are very close to Lichtenstein. In other words, it's a kind of ironic humor. Lichtenstein said that he wanted to show fascism in the media. And also, I did my first work as magazine page pieces because Lichtenstein tried to destroy painting by putting cheap printed matter, but I did things free in magazines. I think pop music was almost done as a kind of a free pop form. I love cliches. That's why I like rock music. Of course, cliches are humorous, and the politics is basically my Jewish stand-up comedy tradition. In other words, Lichtenstein was a stand-up comic, and the Ramones, Tommy Ramone, who began the Ramones, was the drummer, seemed to be in love with Johnny, who was kind of an Irish Catholic fascist in the neighborhood. So the merger of fascism and left Jewish politics, which was the Ramones, was somehow a secret into whatever American punk rock was. But of course, new hardcore, which came afterwards, was a little bit more brutal. I'm against brutality, and I was insulted, and I loved it, by Lydia when I saw her group, Teenage Jesus and the Jerks. I was actually afraid of her. Turns out she's a much more interesting, fragile creature than just a sadist.
I'm so many things, Dan, we don't have all day just to talk about me.
Well, I'm not your psychiatrist, even though I'm Jewish.
If we go back to Rock My Religion, another kind of parallel that I think is very interesting to look at is how you actually put Ann Lee, the founder of the Shaker movement, and her funding the Shaker movement as a kind of a revolt against industrialism, and then you counterpose it to Patti Smith and her idea of actually challenging the idea of the male rock and roll star. And there I think there is also something where you connect both music, rock and roll, politics, but also the way that an industry, culture, art, and music, of course, is always somehow manipulated by the market. And where is the place there to make that revolt? And what does it allow you to actually do? And although you do it within the system, you're still somehow part of it.
No, I think the key to rock and roll it comes from the title of Lydia's first group. It's music by teenagers, for teenagers. Only later, they turned out to be exploited, but exploitation comes very quickly after American anarchism in politics. But I read a book called 7 American Utopias by Dolores Hayden, and apparently the Shakers, who were celibate, because Ann Lee found out when she was getting pregnant, she had all these children who died in infancy, and were part of the labor force. She believed that sex was a problem, whereas another group called Onyando, also in upstate New York, believed that you should have sexual relations. There was a communal situation where people would have sex, men and women with different sexual partners every night. So in other words, the first utopian anti-patriarchal people were kind of religious fanatics, like the Shakers, who actually were based in upstate New York. Onyando is actually not so far from this horrible city called Albany.
Yeah.
So in other words, I'm an intellectual feminist. Whether I'm a real feminist, I don't really know. But intellectually, I'm a super feminist. But I take it from an anthropological point of view. In other words, Margaret Mead, she, by the way, was bisexual, and she wanted to teach sex education in elementary schools. Yes, I'm much older than Lydia, and at the end of World War II, America was a kind of we had a first lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, who was lesbian, began the United Nations, but America has a utopian promise and turns out to be super fascist. I'm still in America, though, but I love going to Europe.
People don't realize what a fascist police state America has become, and it's been coming slowly, but the last few years it's really escalated. It's one of the reasons I've been living in Europe since Bush stole the second election, he was stealing, but America, I mean, with the whole, it's coming out now about the whole surveillance state, something I've been talking about in my work for over a decade, super surveillance, an Orwellian society. It's a reason I don't do Facebook or Twitter. I always knew that they were under surveillance. I don't use it. I have a cell phone. I try never to use it, but I'm just waiting for ass book, put it this way. You know, when you post your ass online and we're notified by that, Facebook, I guess it's good for the kids, but if you want to be surveyed, the situation in America is just so monstrous at this point, but fuel forever for what I do, which is basically to attack the enemy from within and without until they probably take me out, which they won't because I don't make enough money to be of great concern to them. Although that's what I thought until I realized everyone is under surveillance.
Well, Scandinavia is an interesting situation. Supposedly it's a socialist democracy, but I don't really think so from my experiences in Scandinavia. I was in a very wonderful show, actually, the OCA, Office of Contemporary Art, in Oslo. And they showed films from Scandinavian countries about sex. They showed Sweden's film "I Am Curious Yellow," which is a kind of critique of social democracy, and a very mild piece about sexuality. But I found that of all the countries, Scandinavian countries, who are involved with sexual freedom, somehow the country that had the most humor was Denmark. But what's happened now in Scandinavia is it's going very far to the right, very similar to America, but in a different way. And of course, the woman prime minister of Denmark was prime minister for only one reason. There was an American TV program, sitcom, that was based on her life. So she ran on being an American TV movie star.
To follow up on that, I'm also thinking about the difference between, let's say, consensus and conflict. Mm-hmm. And there is one really, a good text in this book, Rock Music Writings by Dan Graham, where you're also writing about the moment where punk rock is actually breaking with rock and roll, where the notion of conflict is very important because it's clearer to have to have two clear stated positions and to have that opposition than trying to conform in a kind of idea of consensus. Is that something that you have been feeling with your work? How to create that kind of...
I'm afraid of women. I'm afraid of women. In fact, men are not allowed to attack women, but since I'm an Aries and have yell and scream, I can be an awful feminist. What you mean? You mean that in punk, in a way, was expressing realistically conflict, whereas the Eagles and Jackson Browne were kind of cop-outs, right? I was interested in punk because I hated the Eagles, Jackson Browne, and even the beloved Joni Mitchell, supposedly beloved.
I suppose that also has to do with the idea of actually, again, the idea of the rock star becoming almost bigger than the image itself, and how much punk
that's what punk rock pretty much tried to shoot down, is that A, anyone can do it, B, we're all in it together. My problem with punk rock, I mean, I was not and never have been punk rock. I never made punk rock music. I'm no wave, which is it comes from a totally different place. How you define no wave, I mean, if you say punk rock, you pretty much know what it sounds like. If you say country, you know what it sounds like. If you say jazz, well, there's so many different kinds of jazz. But when you say no wave, to define what no wave is, you can define it by what it isn't. It doesn't sound anything like its compatriots. It all sounds different from each other. It's mostly dissident. It's mostly unfriendly, user unfriendly by design, with very few exceptions. It comes from personal discomfort or angst. It doesn't come from a social discomfort. It's not meant to make the audience feel as if they're part of the and there was no collective at the time except for other no wave bands. As Dan said, he saw one of my performances. There was 10 people there. Well, why should there be any more? The set was 10 minutes. That's one person a minute. That was enough. It wasn't meant for everyone. I mean, my art never was meant for a general consensus. I've always viewed myself as a complete outsider, and no matter how many different scenes I've been flitting into, or how many collaborative efforts I've made, no matter how many cities I've lived in, no matter how many scenes I've been part of, I myself have always felt like the ultimate outsider, although when I collaborate with people, and I've collaborated with many people from Sonic Youth and Henry Rollins and Karen Finley, Wanda Coleman, Omar Rodriguez of Mars Volta, the list of the birthday party, Nick Cave, Einstürzen de Neubauten. The list is, just go read my bio, it's 14 pages long. But the collaborative effort was always interesting to me, probably because I still feel that outside of that, I stand comfortably alone. And not that my dilemma is so unique. I mean, I deal basically in all of my work, I'm always looking for a way to find, as rebellion, pleasure from the original trauma of whether it's the trauma of birth or the trauma that happens to us as children or the trauma of poverty, religious persecution, or just the individual. And the individual is persecuted and prosecuted still, I guess, unless you're in a happy utopia like this place can appear to be at times. So as an outsider who stands comfortably alone, back to what the original question was, if you believe that I can actually follow the trajectory, punk rock was about leveling the playing field, that nobody was a rock star. I never felt, although I consider myself the no-wave Nostradamus, I'm comfortable with that title. I don't even like the title musician. I only use musician as a tool to further the words, which are the most important. I consider myself a historian of my times and of these times, a journalist, yes, a writer. A word like artist is, I find it kind of insulting. It doesn't sum up the entirety of who I am or what I do, which is more of a evangelical anti-preacher, no-wave Nostradamus, rock my fucking religion, and nothing to do with religion, but rock it because it does become evangelical. And basically that kind of sums up the place that I'm coming from. I never, especially when I first started, I quit one of my bands because it became too popular. Eight-Eyed Spy, we were doing a show, it was sold out, I hated the look in people's fucking faces, because they were looking at me with this adoration that had nothing to do with who or what I am. It's, oh, look at our girl, who are you fucking looking at? And what do you think you see? Because you don't see me. So get your eyes off of me. And I quit that night. Now, I guess that's about as anti-rock star, a rock star, as you can get. And I quit and I left town. I'm like, don't look at me like that. Because of where I come from, it was the first song I ever wrote, and I didn't even perform it, was called Popularity is So Boring. But that's where I was coming from. That's where I came from. And that's even outside of punk rock, because basically still, they were all in it together. No, I was in it to get out of it, and to get out of myself and out of my situation, and to act as a mouthpiece for other disenfranchised individuals who didn't want to pick up the gun, but wanted me to pick up the pen.
I want to go back to the film Rock My Religion. At the very end of Rock My Religion is a kind of an attack on Andy Warhol's idea that art has become business. It was actually in New York in the 70s. Nixon was trying to destroy the city because he believed in silent majority. He gave no money for New York City, so New York is in ruins. So all the spaces where people did their art, performed, and also there were rock musicians as well as artists, were tiny little spaces. And I think rock music belongs actually in kind of ruined situations. PS1 was actually an old school where artists like Mata Clark could put drill holes into the floor. I like to perform there. I did my performance pieces there because I hated high school, and I liked the idea of an old high school ex-high school that was falling apart can be destroyed further. So that was my idea of the artist's destruction. But actually, art world and music, whether it was punk, new wave, or whatever it was actually a kind of a small communal family experience. So Signal, which Ellen is associated with, is like a small communal experience that is both shows video, music, and is basically the kind of alternative space I believe in. In New York, the spaces were almost like ruins. And of course, Lydia fit very well because she can scream and yell at people in kind of decayed spaces. But for me, music is ecstasy. In other words, being Jewish, I'm too rationalistic, but I love the ecstasy of music, which is partly communal. And I think rock by religion has little to do with that idea. Of course, it's a fantasy, but I now when my assistant and I type replies to emails, we listen to my music collection, which is vast. At the moment, my assistant and my favorite is old Nancy Sinatra records.
I covered a few of those. Sinatra, Lee Hazelwood songs in my day.
She's so cool. I also like listening to the Ventures, who actually are quite conceptual in a strange way. But music can be all these things in a much better way, by the way, than so-called conceptual art, or even punk art, or even punk music. Punk music died very quickly. But of course, the Ramones tried to survive. That was a mistake.
Also, something else that I'm thinking is connecting you is this kind of hybrid forms that you always are engaging with. Like you haven't really found, or you haven't allowed yourself to be packaged into this is what I do, and this is also recognizable by the market.
Well, he's psychotic and I'm a schizophrenic, so what are you going to do?
I'm borderline schizophrenic. Sorry, borderline. Psychosis is schizophrenic.
You'll get there.
But on the other hand, you're having a ball in old Barcelona.
There you go, absolutely.
But what about all the tourists there?
They don't come to my house.
No, but
I don't leave my house, so it doesn't matter.
But at the same time, that said, I also recognize the kind of the backside of that, which is a kind of a constant struggle of continuing doing what you want to do, of being able to communicate it, of also maybe somehow struggling with your own visions.
Look, Henry Miller had to sell pornography for $1 a page. I mean, struggle is part of the terrain. I never applied for an art grant. That I'm here is almost an affront to a certain part of me because I'm being sponsored by a museum, which I think I'm a living relic. I fucking should be. However, I didn't get into doing music because I thought I was going to make a profit. I got into doing what I do because if I don't do it, I'm going to hurt somebody or hurt myself because it is that much of a drive. I need to create, I need to espouse, I need to get out of my system that which, if I do not release in a variety of formats, is going to contaminate me more than it already has. And part of that is political, and part of it is ecstatic, part of it is sexual. When I began, even from the age of 17, I was doing 2 bands at one time that contradicted the sound of each other. Everything I did for, I guess, at least the first 15 years, if not until this very day, I can't review, there's too many projects, contradicted completely the sound that came before it. So I would have one band that was an atrocious, precise, fascist din with a horrendous razor blade guitar, at the same time having a band that somebody described like a slug crawling across a razor blade that was so slow. So horrorcore with, at the same time as something that was a really precise fascist beat. Then I would do something that was a big band sound. Then I would have a surf band. So I was constantly as a contrarian, contradicting, not to purposely contradict my sound, but because there were different sides that I had to express, and hence why I found a need to collaborate with many different people. I always viewed the collaborative process as a sacred zone where all bullshit was left out of. So whatever your petty complaints are in reality, you keep that out and you go into the safety zone where the main goal is to, with ecstasy, encourage each other to take it to some other level, which I think I've been very successful as a serial collaborator in. That I've been able to never have a day job is my greatest success as an artist. I had 2 jobs in my life, one as an underage maid in an upstate hotel where I would rip off every businessman that was there so I could get enough money to go to New York City, and the other was giving hand jobs under the table at a go-go bar so I could raise enough money to bring Teenage Jesus to New York in 1977, which I did. The rest of my time has been hustling, struggling, and being creative enough and with enough discipline so that, and oh yeah, independent artists, you must have a really free and liberated life. My life is about planning what's going to happen in the next 7 months, because if I don't, I'm going to be homeless one more time, which is be about 5 or 6 times in my adult life, and at 54, I'm not against it. I was homeless 8 years ago. I'm not against it, and it may happen again. Because what I do is what I have to fucking do, whether you're here or you're not here. It doesn't matter. And how does something become popular when it's continually changing? That's not for me to, that's why it's called Will Work for Drugs, my last book. Like, if only it was drugs that it took to get me to create at the level I do. Well, drugs help, but I'm telling you, there's something else that can't be stopped.
Well, personally, I'm in the art field for one reason. I like hybrids. First, my work was somewhere between magazine page pieces, writing, and conceptual art. At the moment, I'm doing work that's between architecture and sculpture. I like hybrids, but actually my passion, along with music, is architecture tourism. So thing about art is you get tickets and you can go different places. I'm not educated, so I like to go to museums. I love the Prada, because in the Prada you could see it's free on Sunday, and you could see teenagers looking at Hieronymus Bosch and realizing he must have been taking some wild drugs. Or also, this is very perverse. Sometimes I'd like to see fathers with their 12, 13-year-old daughters, and the daughters are looking at Botticelli and thinking they're as beautiful as Botticelli. In other words, I like the voyeurism of being an architecture and art tourist. I think a lot of people now in Stockholm, I've noticed, are here because they're older people, maybe with their kids or grandchildren, and they're reliving the fantasy of Stockholm in the early 60s. Of course, it's changed a lot, but you have a great museum anyway. It's still a great museum.
It's still a great museum.
Mm-hmm.
Something else that I'm also thinking is something that's connecting you. It's actually the economy of your productions, which means somehow keeping it low, managing it yourself, and somehow keeping, being on top of it.
The beauty of GarageBand as a musician.
Exactly.
I've started to create all my own music when other musicians just don't work fast enough for me with GarageBand, and the quality is such that it's completely releasable and it's amazing. So, I think GarageBand is one of the greatest pieces of technology for any musician, because there is then no expense involved. I've always been working below a budget, but for instance, in the first 20 years of my career, somehow, I don't know how, I can't remember, found ways of being able to conceive a concept, find the collaborators, rehearse them, put out the document on record, vinyl, that was before CDs, put out the vinyl, and get it released, which I don't even know how I was able to do that at such an incredible, so many records, because now it would just be almost impossible, but GarageBand makes it possible, and also, it's always been a cottage industry, but the turnover rate in the early days, I just really don't even realize how I was able to just find ways. I guess the spoken word always paid for the music stuff. So. And
also thinking about Rock My Religion, you were saying that it was really a kind of a...
No budget.
Exactly.
Yes, I had a new Super 8 camera, and Thurston Moore liked Minor Threat and Black Flag, so I went to a concert, videotaped it. I also would trade with people, with people who had footage from TV, or from their own videotaping or Super 8 video filming of concerts. And I traded my material for their material. It was kind of a scavenger of different footage. Some stolen from the New York Public Library. They had a film about a religious cult in West Virginia, where where the people who are part of the cult, the Protestant cult, actually they're minors, and most would die of lung disease from the coal dust. So they handle snakes, and whatever snakes poisonous snakes kill them. That meant they were going to hell. The ones who survived would be with God. They use fire, so I used a small part of that for rock religion. But scavenging was pretty important. Maybe back in the old days, European days, it was called collage, right, in Schwitters. But I just put it together on nothing. When I was filming the Shakers in upstate New York, I took a Greyhound bus 15 miles away from the Shaker buildings, and I walked. It was kind of masochistic, but then I'm Jewish, but I wanted to finish the project enormously. But I also wanted to talk about something else to change the subject. What do you think of musicians who do art?
You're asking me.
I'm asking everybody. I think the worst was Jerry Garcia. He did clowns. And believe it or not, Tony Bennett, who, by the way, is loved by Thurston Moore's mother, is not bad. He's also a bit on the left, Tony Bennett. Of course, I don't like his music. But
I think it's much worse when actors do music than when musicians do art. Come on. I mean, Julia Lewis. I mean, that's pretty.
What about Jeff Bridges?
Jared Leto. I mean,
What about Jeff Bridges?
He's okay. He's good.
I know you went to school with Kim Gordon.
He's good.
He's a cool guy, right?
Yeah, he's good. Yeah, he's good. Look, to me, it doesn't matter what format it takes. It's like Jerry Garcia. I mean, to me, his music was atrocious, so why shouldn't his art suck?
I agree with you on that.
So there you go. I mean, it's all down to your taste.
I agree about that.
I mean, again, I prefer not to be confined to any category or genre of what I do. I mean, I do photography, I do video, I do spoken word, I do the written word, I do music, but it's all just a tool, because at the end of it, even a photograph, the point is whatever the literature is, that whatever the point needs to be made, which is going to be the solve or the salve to a universal trauma. I mean, it's always going back to the spoken word. It's always going back to a one-liner. It's always going back to a paragraph, whatever format my art takes. So now when I do a solo show, as I did last night in the middle of the forest in Tolmin, Slovenia, next to a river, my show consists of video projections, which I've created, psycho-ambient music, which I've designed on GarageBand, both of it for no expense, word-based performance, to create with the sound and the music and the words more of a womb-like atmosphere, to embrace people into this world, into the Lydian universe, where I hope by the end of the performance, after we've torn to shreds religion and the patriarchy and the night terrors that bad romance can give us, that we come together at the end to celebrate the fact that pleasure is the only true rebellion left, because it's the first thing they steal from us, that is, they being the politicians in their campaign of fear and war whoring. So in the end, no matter what I'm saying or how I'm saying it, no matter what it sounds like or who I'm playing with, it does come back to ecstasy, because I insist, as a hedonist of the highest order, to find ecstasy.
But Lydia, that was one of your titles. I forget.
The agony is the ecstasy?
Exactly, yes, you got it.
No, you got it.
No, I
never forgot it. But thank you for reminding me.
You have a lot of good titles.
And really, I mean, I have a lot of good titles, and that was really an agony to listen to that, so there you go.
But my favorite Lydia Lunch, there are two. Harry Cruz with Kim Gordon, where she takes over by speaking too much. Although it has amazing music and interplay with the live audience. And I love Queen of Siam. That's my all-time favorite.
Thank you, Dan. I think Harry Cruz might have been the only group, it was myself, Kim Gordon, and a female drummer, that every song was based around one of his books. I think this is the only time a group has ever done this. I could be wrong.
His being Harry Cruz.
And Harry Cruz being the writer of choice.
From Gainesville, who, by the way, is the hometown of Bo Diddley, and also, believe it or not, Tom Petty.
You know, so many pieces of rock trivia, you just spin my world, baby.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm kind of a tourist, a rock and roll tourist, architecture tourist, but in terms of my own work, I was always afraid of children. But my children are my biggest fans, so what I want to do at work, I say my work is for children, for children's pleasure and fun, and a photo opportunity for parents. And my work is very successful in Scandinavia, because I remember Louisiana. When I first went to Louisiana, they have a room where you lie down as a child, and there are all these mobiles and art that you could play with. So money in Scandinavia, especially now in Norway, goes for children's education and fun. So I never know what my work is going to be like. I always think it's not going to work, but then when I see it as a spectator, as maybe a childlike spectator, I can really enjoy it. It's hard to enjoy your own work, but it's fun.
It's never been my point.
One other thing I was thinking about, I mean, now that we're here somehow thinking about Rock My Religion turning 30, and of course having a body of work, both of you having a body of work that people and audiences are re-examining.
They better re-examine it. They never paid attention the first time.
That's good. But still, I was also thinking about the idea of still somehow tricking that position. And I know that you, Dan, you made a series of CDs called Dan Graham's Greatest Hits, somehow also alluding to the idea of instead of doing the greatest hits of the works and doing retrospectives, you somehow give out this series of CDs.
It's not a work of art. It was
no, it's not. That's my point. It's not a work of art. It's a hobby, but it's also somehow a critique towards that idea of, now I have this body of work that is somehow being restaged and reshown. And is that something that you're consciously playing with or wanting to trick, the idea of actually having a legacy? And
a legacy, I'm afraid very few museums own my work. But of course, this museum has a rather major piece. The first time I used the sauna boards as flooring because I realized I was in Scandinavia. So it's not a sauna piece. You actually go outdoors, but makes it very portable because the flooring can be picked up. It's just planks of wood. Actually, my work is like my work when it's quasi-functional. And my favorite surviving piece is Waterloo Sunset at the Haywood Gallery, dedicated to Ray Davies, my hero. Unfortunately, they're about to take it down. It has cartoons and cartoons for children to look at. Also, old people can look at it because it has classic cartoons like Crazy Cat and Mickey Mouse. But I like my work. I love museums because they're a place where I did a piece actually for the Carnegie International where I have a heart pavilion. Because I think the most important thing about museums is romantic pickup place, cafes. So I'm sorry, I don't like my old sculptures or even Rock My Religion because they're supposedly classics. I like doing work that's quasi-functional in a kind of museum-type context. At the moment, I'm not getting that much work out because the new generation are identified with art and architecture. I like the area because it's a hybrid. So at the moment, I'm having a hard time getting work out. So this was a strange situation. The 30 years of Rock My Religion, I'm just amazed it survived. It's like Neil Young fixes up old cars. So in a way,
polish off that film.
What?
Polish off that film.
So in other words, this is like looking at an old relic.
For me, it's interesting, and this goes back to Thurston Moore. I don't know why he's the center of all fucking attention today, but he is.
Well, he's a cool guy.
He's absolutely a cool guy.
Also, he's got a great band.
Yeah, well, which one? The new one? Yeah. So anyway,
I've never heard them.
Excuse me, I'm talking.
Okay.
Thurston Moore was sitting on my living room couch a couple of years ago, and he was just about to publish this love letter, basically to me, called New York City Underground Music. Right? He wrote a book about No Wave. Basically, it's a love letter to me and a few other people. You laugh, but it's true. You know it. And Thurston's on my couch. He's like, "Hey, why don't you do a Teenage Jesus revival?" And I'm like, "Hey, they're all dead except for one who plays drums with Nick Cave. So why don't you be in Teenage Jesus?" And Thurston said, "All right." To which I replied, "Well, look. Teenage Jesus music was very brutal. It was very tight, though. It was the first music I did, but I mean, it was one of the tightest no-wave bands because when you're that minimal and you're playing for 7 minutes or 10 minutes most, it better be tight. For some reason, it was just mandatory. But I trained them with a coat hanger, beaten to perfection. So I asked Thurston if he would come under the guise of the coat hanger, and he said yes, so we reformed. or as I called it, the resurrection of teenage Jesus. As a contrarian, it made sense to me because, I mean, look, I'm still living, I'm doing something new all the time, forever. Why would I go back to, I know it, people 30 years later still haven't caught up to me, and it's more than 30 years, so whatever, cut him a break. So we decided to resuscitate teenage Jesus, and when I went to do this, a few things were interesting. One was, because I'm not a musician, I didn't know how to play, I wrote the music, somebody gave me a busted guitar. I'm going to revive the songs, to which I remember as if I wrote them yesterday, although it was more than 35 years ago. But I couldn't figure out, most of the music is like, I don't know keys, I don't know chords, but I couldn't figure out where to play the rhythmic part. And I had to call Jim Skulvunis, now the drummer for Nick Cave. And he said, well, you didn't have a guitar, you borrowed a guitar, but you always borrowed the same guitar. And somebody tuned it, but they tuned it once a month. Sonic Youth has their special tuning. I just had accidental tuning. And most of the recording from Teenage Jesus would be live, so there's specific harmonics that nobody can figure out where you're so as long as you're playing together at the same time, there you go. So legacy, anyway, we're doing the resuscitation of Teenage Jesus. And of course there's 800 people in New York. There was never more than 8 or 10. But the music made me as angry as it made me then, because it's an anger that is it's a music that is music of a temper tantrum. And what was important to me and why to do it again is because there's not enough music that's that brutal by women, because women don't want to be that ugly. So I always try to tell the ladies, don't be afraid to be ugly, because you'll never be as ugly as I am. Sorry, but I'm not.
Thurston was very proud. The last time I saw him, he said he took Glenn Branca to see Teenage Jesus and the Jerks, and Glenn loved it. Of course, Glenn is so far from rock and roll now.
Glenn Branca dropped to his knees and told me I was a rock star. I almost kicked him in the teeth because I am not a rock star. And Glenn Branca never liked me, and I never liked him in the first place, but it was nice to see him on his
Glenn
knees.
Was my best friend.
It was nice to see him on his knees.
Glenn was my best friend. But he has a similar background to you. He's actually from Harrisburg. That's where they had the big nuclear meltdown.
3 Mile Island.
3 Mile Island. His father was in the military. I think his mother Italian American, and he said he based all his music on going to see films and listening to the soundtracks. And you know, most of the movie soundtracks are based on Mahler. You know, Bruckner and Mahler. So that and of course Hitler loved Bruckner. So in other words, he had an upper-lower class interest in semi-militaristic music based on American soundtracks.
There you go.
And I think, and T.J. Clark said the revolutionary class is the petite bourgeois, upper-lower class people becoming lower middle class. So I wouldn't put down non-educated people. I didn't go to college or art school, but non-educated people who grew up with. I grew up with Italian Americans, like Glenn Branca. Somehow, one thing in my I think rock and roll is it's not for snobby rich people like David Byrne. He's also Scottish.
By the way, David Byrne would always run when he saw me coming through. I mean, I was 17. I was just hanging out, but David Byrne was terrified of me. I'm kind of proud of that. I hope he still is.
One more thing that I wanted to say now that you were talking about also education, I think what is also so great with Rock and Religion is the way how it traces so many fields of thoughts, knowledge, connections, connecting it to contemporary politics, but also to the idea of both society, religion, power. And I definitely think that the idea of knowledge is not just something that is being or is institutionalized. So, I mean, your thinking is also really a very good proof of that it's not about where you're educated, but it's also about like how you take in that information and what you do with it. And also would just like to say something to the audience as a kind of a small anecdote. This is the first time that Lydia Lunch and Dan Graham are in conversation together with each other. So I just feel that, this could really go on. keep on continuing. But
I'm sure both of us can talk all day, but let's not let's not victimize the rest of the audience with that concept.
Lydia is a Gemini, whereas I'm an Aries, and some of my best friends are Geminis. But see, I'm Jewish. Jewish people like to say some of my best friends are black. But the fact is, I just happen to love music. And I really miss Thurston because musicians are always on tour, so you can never see them.
Exactly.
That said, I was thinking maybe we should also just open up to the audience if there are any questions.
I've lost one of my hearing aids.
Because, and after that, Rock My Religion is going to be screened.